Hello and welcome. So in today's video we're going to look at some basic for loops in Python. For loops are very good as count controlled loops, so we will continue to do something for a set number of times, or we will continue to do something as long as we haven't reached the end of a variable, a string, or a list or something like that. So let's get into Python via idle and set this up. And the simplest for loop I can create would be something like for I in range 10. I'm going to print I each time. So I is a variable that is created within the for loop, and it is automatically set to 0 when it is created. So I will be 0, and this says basically as long as I, which is currently 0, is less than 10, then we're going to print it. And unlike a while loop, I don't need to add 1 to I each time. The for loop does that for me. So it will run, print I, add 1 to it, and continue. So if I run this, and I will need to save it in the usual location, overwrite my test version, and it will print 0 to 9. Note again that I starts at 0, and this prints up to 10, not including 10. If I want to print 10, then I can change it to a range 11, and this will now print 0 to 10. Now I can of course have a variable, let's call it count, and give count the value 11, and say for I in range count, print I, and it will still print 0 to 10. If you're using the in range function, then you can either type in a number or you can put a variable inside. Now the range function within a for loop, or as part of a for loop, comes with the ability to set the start, the end point, and the step or the value we're going to increase this by each time. So if I change this to 0, I'm going to say count as the end point, and I'm going to go up by 2 each time. So for I, which starts at 0, in range from 0 to count, which is 11, and we're going to increase it by 2 each time. So this will now print all the even numbers from 0 to 10. If I want to change it back so that I print every one, I can still do that, and it will say 0 to 10. That is just a little bit more complicated to write this out than it is to just say for I in range count, but it will still work. So this is useful in a variety of cases. It might just be that when something happens, for a set number of times you want to print a message out, or as long as we are in this range and we're going through this, maybe we're updating other variables or using it for a larger algorithm that is doing some mathematics to enhance something else, or in a simple case like this, I'm just printing the numbers 0 to 10. So it can be used for a variety of cases. It can do a lot more than just print 0 to 10. So the second example of a for loop I'm going to show is to iterate or count over a string. So I'm going to say name equals Mr. Fryer, and I'm going to say for C in name print C, and you will notice that I've used C instead of I. I used I in the previous one, as that is a convention. If you're using a variable or iterator to count over something, then you normally use I in the first loop. If you're using a second loop, you go to J, and in a third loop, you go to K. You can go away from that. You don't have to stick to the convention, but that is what is done. If you're looking at strings or you're looking at lists, we tend to do it slightly differently. So this C stands for character. So for each character in the variable name, note that I've not said in range name, just in name, I want to print that character. So when I run this, it will say Mr. Fryer, and it will keep the space. The space is considered a character. Now, you will hopefully notice that at the end of a for loop, just like with a while loop, we have a colon, and we have had two keywords. So we've had for and in. So whether I'm saying for I in range or for C in, we are checking largely with these two keywords. I'm going to change this slightly again so that I'm going to print the length of the variable name, and then I'm going to say for I in range name, I'm going to print I. So in order to get this to actually iterate over the length of the variable name, we have to add this len function before name so that it is getting the actual length, because the in range function here cannot actually iterate over a string. It has to have a number. So this len function, short for length, gets the length of the name, which is 8, and passes the number 8 to the range function. Without that, it will give it an error. So hopefully when I run this, it will print 0 to 7, 7 being 1 less than name, which has 8 characters including the space, and it prints 0 to 7 because it stops before that 8th character, not at the end of it. And this will say 8 for the length, and then it will say 0 to 7. If I want this to print 0 to 8, which is the length of name, then I can add 1 inside the range function, and this will now print 0 to 8. So sometimes you have to add 1 simply because this will stop 1 short of the true length, so we add 1 to that to get to the true length. And again, if I want to start instead of from 0, say I want to start from 1, I could say 1, put all of that inside the stop point, and let's say 1 as the increment, and this will print 1 to 8 instead of 0 to 8. To make this a little bit easier, instead of printing length, I'm going to create a variable called name len and put that as equal to the length of the variable name, and I'm going to add the +1 here, and then if I paste this in and use this variable, it will still do the same thing. So it prints 1 to 8, the only difference being in that I've stopped printing the length the first time. So this again is a potential implementation if you want to get, say, find the length of a string you've got, print something a certain number of times, or update a variable, or continue on from that, or ask the user to enter a string, and then you can print 0 or 1 until that number has occurred, and then tell them how many characters are in that string. These are fairly basic versions of for loops. For loops can get quite complicated quickly or be used for a lot of powerful things later on, and I will show some of this in later videos. This is just to introduce the idea of these keywords, so for and in, as well as range and length and things like that. So hopefully this will form a good basis for any future use of for loops. That is it for today. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.